The dust-choked streets of Independence, California in the summer of 1882, bore witness to many desperate acts. But Quinton Olsen had never seen a woman trade away her only shoes for a hunk of stale bread and a piece of dried meat until that sweltering August afternoon. He had ridden into town with a string of horses to sell, his saddlebags heavy with the earnings from a cattle drive that had taken him clear across Nevada and into the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada range. The sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden storefronts, and most sensible folks had retreated indoors to wait out the worst of the heat. But Quinton had spotted her from across the street, a young woman with hair the color of autumn wheat, her dress patched and faded but clean, standing barefoot outside the general store with a pair of worn leather shoes clutched in her trembling hands. The shopkeeper, a portly man named Henderson whom Quinton had dealt with before, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, shaking his head. The woman said something Quinton could not hear, then held the shoes higher, practically begging. Henderson examined them briefly, then disappeared inside, returning moments later with the meager provisions. The exchange was made quickly, and the woman clutched the food to her chest like it was gold itself, her feet bare against the hot wooden planks of the boardwalk. Quinton felt something twist in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced since his mother had passed 5 years prior. He tied his horses to the hitching post and crossed the street with purposeful strides, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. By the time he reached the general store, the woman had moved to the alley beside the building, sitting in a sliver of shade with her back against the weathered wood. She was tearing small pieces from the bread and eating them slowly, methodically, as though she had learned to make every bite last. He approached carefully, removing his hat as he drew near. She looked up at him with eyes the color of sage, wary and exhausted, but there was a fire in them that spoke of survival against considerable odds. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, though hardship had etched faint lines around her mouth. "Excuse me, miss," Quinton said, his voice rough from days on the trail. "I could not help but notice your transaction with Mr. Henderson." She stiffened, pulling her feet beneath her skirt as though ashamed of their nakedness. "I am not looking for charity, sir," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone who had once known better circumstances. "I made a fair trade." "I am sure you did," Quinton replied, crouching down so he was not towering over her. "But those shoes looked like they might have had some more miles in them. Would you mind if I went in and bought them back from Henderson? I have a sister about your size, and she could use a new pair." It was a lie, and they both knew it. His only sister had died of scarlet fever when she was 7 years old, but the woman's pride was clearly all she had left, and Quinton had no intention of stripping that away too. "Your sister," she repeated slowly, studying his face with those penetrating eyes. "How convenient that she would be exactly my size." "Remarkable coincidence," Quinton agreed, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "But stranger things have happened in California." She was silent for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. "If you wish to purchase used shoes from Mr. Henderson, that is your business. I cannot stop you." "Much obliged, miss." Quinton stood and walked into the general store, where Henderson was arranging tins of preserved peaches on a shelf. "Those shoes the young woman just traded," Quinton said without preamble. "What would you take for them?" Henderson turned around, recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Olsen, is that you? Did not expect to see you back in Independence so soon. Those shoes are not worth much. Soles are thin, leather is cracking. I only took them because the girl looked half-starved and I figured the church ladies could patch them up for someone who needs them." "How much?" Quinton repeated. $2 would more than cover what I gave her in trade, Henderson said, shrugging. But if you are thinking what I think you are thinking, you should know that girl has been in town for about a week. Nobody knows where she came from or what her story is. She has been sleeping in the old stable behind the church, doing odd jobs for food. Proud as they come, though, refuses handouts. $2 for the shoes, Quinton said, pulling the coins from his pocket and setting them on the counter with deliberate care. And I will take a pair of those ladies' boots on the wall. Size looks about right. Add a week's worth of provisions, basic supplies. Charge it all to my account. Henderson raised his eyebrows but said nothing as he collected the shoes from beneath the counter. They were indeed worn, the leather cracked across the top, the soles thin enough to feel every pebble on the road. But they had been cared for, polished as well as could be managed with whatever the woman had available. That spoke volumes about who she was, or at least who she had been. While Henderson assembled the provisions and wrapped the new boots in brown paper, Quinton examined a few other items. He added a tin of salve for blisters, a pair of thick socks, and on impulse, a small bag of peppermint candies. His mother had always said that a little sweetness could make the hardest day more bearable. When he emerged from the store with his packages, the woman was still in the alley, though she had finished her bread and was carefully wrapping the dried meat in a handkerchief. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and her eyes went immediately to the bundle in his arms. "Your sister is very fortunate," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I have a confession to make," Quinton said, settling himself down to sit on the ground across from her, his back against the opposite wall of the alley. The space was narrow enough that their legs almost touched. "I do not actually have a sister. Not anymore. She died a long time ago." The woman's expression flickered with something between anger and resignation. "Then you lied to me." "I did," he admitted. "And I apologize for that, but you looked like you needed your dignity more than you needed the truth in that moment." She was quiet, her hand still clutching the handkerchief with its precious cargo. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this? You do not know me. I could be anyone. A thief, a con artist, someone running from the law. Are you any of those things?" Quinton asked mildly. "No," she said firmly. "I am simply someone who has had a terrible run of luck." "Then we have that in common," Quinton replied. 2 years ago, I lost my entire herd to a flash flood, spent the last 24 months rebuilding from nothing. I know what it feels like to watch everything slip away and have to start over with just your pride and your determination." She studied him with those sage-colored eyes, and he could see her deciding whether to trust him. The moment stretched between them like a rope pulled taut, and then something in her seemed to soften just a fraction. "My name is Savannah Blake," she said finally. "I came to California from Missouri after my father died. He had a claim here, or at least he said he did. Letters from a partner who had struck it rich in the mines. When I finally made it to independence, I discovered that the partner never existed. My father had been corresponding with a charlatan who had likely never set foot in California. The money I had for the journey ran out 2 towns ago. I sold everything I owned just to get this far." The story came out haltingly, as though each word cost her something. Quinton listened without interruption, watching the play of emotions across her face. There was grief there for her father, anger at the deception, but most of all, a bone-deep weariness that came from fighting too hard for too long. "I am sorry about your father," Quinton said when she finished, "and about the claim. There are too many men willing to prey on hope and desperation." "I was foolish," Savannah said bitterly. "I should have questioned the letters, should have verified the claim before spending every cent we had." "You were grieving and trying to honor your father's wishes," Quinton countered. "That is not foolish. That is being a good daughter." She looked down at her bare feet, and he saw a tear trace its way down her dusty cheek. She wiped it away quickly, angrily, as though furious at herself for the display of weakness. "Here," Quinton said, pushing the wrapped boots across the narrow space between them. "These are for you. Not for an imaginary sister, not as charity. Consider them a loan if that sits better with your pride. You can pay me back when you get on your feet." "I cannot accept this," Savannah protested, but her eyes were fixed on the package with unmistakable longing. "You can, and you will," Quinton said firmly. "Because right now, you need boots more than you need pride, and I need to know that you will not end up with an infection from walking barefoot in this heat. The ground gets hot enough to fry an egg in the afternoon sun." She reached out slowly and pulled the package onto her lap, unwrapping it with careful fingers. The boots were simple but sturdy, made of good leather with solid soles. Not fancy, but they would last. She ran her hand over them reverently, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will pay you back, I swear it." "I believe you," Quinton said. "Now I also bought back your old shoes. Figured you might want them for sentimental reasons, or maybe just to prove to yourself that you can come back from this." He handed her the worn shoes, and she took them with a small, choked laugh. "My mother made these for me when I turned 16. I have been wearing them for 7 years. I thought I would never see them again." "Sometimes things come back to us when we need them most," Quinton said. He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let me buy you a proper meal at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen makes the best dumplings this side of the Sierra Nevada." Savannah hesitated, then placed her hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. Her hand was small and calloused, the hand of someone who had known work. She pulled on the thick socks first, then the boots, lacing them up with fingers that trembled slightly. When she stood fully upright in them, she was taller than he had expected, the top of her head coming nearly to his shoulder. "These are wonderful," she said, taking a few experimental steps. "They fit perfectly." "Good eye for sizing," Quinton said with a grin. "Comes from years of outfitting horses and cattle. You learn to judge measurements." They walked together down the main street of Independence, past the saloon where piano music drifted out into the afternoon heat, past the assayer's office and the land claims building, until they reached Mrs. Chen's boarding house at the far end of town. It was a neat, whitewashed building with blue shutters and flower boxes in the windows, a small oasis of domestic tranquility in the rough and tumble mining town. Mrs. Chen herself answered the door, a tiny Chinese woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She looked from Quinton to Savannah and back again, then nodded as though confirming something to herself. "Mr. Olsen," she said in her precise, accented English. "You bring a guest for dinner. Very good. I have just made fresh dumplings and there is too much for only my boarders. Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Savannah Blake," Quinton said. "She is new to Independence and could use a good meal and maybe some information about work in town." Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes softened as they took in Savannah's worn dress and too thin frame. Come in, come in. You sit, you eat. We talk about work after. Cannot think on empty stomach." The boarding house dining room was cool and dim, with lace curtains filtering the harsh sunlight into something gentler. A long table dominated the center of the room, already set with simple but spotless dishes. Mrs. Chen ushered them to seats and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with steaming plates of dumplings, along with bowls of soup and fresh bread that must have come from the bakery that morning. Savannah ate with the careful restraint of someone who had gone hungry recently and knew better than to make herself sick by eating too quickly. Quinton found himself watching her between his own bites, noting the delicate way she handled her chopsticks, the proper posture even in her exhaustion. She had been raised with manners, with education. The fall from whatever circumstances she had known before must have been devastating. "These are delicious, Mrs. Chen," Savannah said after she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger. "Thank you so much for your hospitality." "You have manners good," Mrs. Chen said approvingly. "This is important. Now you need work. What can you do?" "I can read and write, keep accounts, teach basic letters and arithmetic," Savannah said. "I can sew, cook, clean, do laundry. I am willing to work hard at anything honest." "The school needs a teacher," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully. "Old Mrs. Patterson went back east to live with her daughter, but school board is very particular. They want references, background. This you can provide." Savannah's face fell. "I have no references anymore. Everything I owned was lost or sold. I have only my word." "Your word is good enough for me," Quinton heard himself say, "and I will vouch for your character to the school board." Both women turned to look at him in surprise. "You just met her this afternoon, Mrs. Chen pointed out with typical bluntness. "How you can vouch?" "I am a good judge of character," Quinton said stubbornly. "And Miss Blake needs a chance. Everyone deserves at least one person willing to stand up for them." Savannah was staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "First the boots, then the meal, now this. What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Quinton said honestly. "I want nothing from you except maybe the satisfaction of knowing I helped someone who needed it. My mother always said that we are measured not by what we take from the world but by what we give back to it. I have been fortunate lately. My horses sold well. My cattle are thriving. Seems only right to share that fortune." "You are a strange man, Quinton Olsen," Savannah said, but there was warmth in her voice now and the hint of a smile on her lips. "So I have been told," Quinton agreed cheerfully. "But strange is better than cruel, and the world has enough cruel men already." Mrs. Chen nodded decisively. "I have room here. Miss Blake can stay, work off her board by helping me with the cleaning and the cooking. The boarders, they are not difficult men. They work the mines, they come home tired, they want hot food and clean bed. You can do this." "Yes," Savannah said immediately. "Yes, absolutely. I will work as hard as you need." "Good, then it is settled. You start tomorrow morning, tonight you rest. You look like you have not slept in a real bed for some time." "I have not," Savannah admitted. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, thank you both. I do not know how I will ever repay this kindness." "You pay by living well," Mrs. Chen said simply. "By being good person, by helping others when you can. This is how kindness is repaid." After the meal, Quinton walked Savannah upstairs to the small room Mrs. Chen had designated for her. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the mountains in the distance. "This is more than I could have hoped for," Savannah said, running her hand over the quilt. "This morning I woke up in a stable, not knowing where my next meal would come from. Now I have a room, work, and new boots. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Quinton assured her. "It is real, and it is what you deserve." She turned to face him, and in the soft light coming through the window she looked younger, less burdened. "I will pay you back for the boots and the provisions," she said. "It may take me some time, but I will do it." "There is no rush," Quinton said. "I will be around Independence for a while. I have a ranch about 10 miles out of town, up in the foothills. I come into town every week or so for supplies and to check on things. We will settle accounts when you are back on your feet properly." "Your ranch," Savannah said. "You mentioned losing your herd. You built it back up." "I did," Quinton confirmed. "It took every bit of savings I had, plus a loan from the bank that I am still paying off, but I have good grazing land, clean water, and a small but healthy herd. I also breed horses, which is more reliable income than cattle in some ways. There is always someone who needs a good horse. It sounds like you have worked very hard, Savannah observed. Hard work is about all I know, Quinton admitted. My father died when I was 17, left me with nothing but debt and a piece of land that barely grew weeds. But the land was good once you got water to it, and I was too stubborn to give up. Spent the next 9 years making it into something worth having. You are 26, Savannah asked. 27 this past spring, Quinton corrected. And you, if you do not mind me asking? 23, Savannah said, though some days I feel twice that. I understand the sentiment, Quinton said with a rueful smile. Well, I should let you rest. I need to see about boarding my horses for the night and finding my own place to sleep. You could stay here, Savannah said quickly, then flushed. I mean, Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house. I am sure she has rooms available. I am sure she does, Quinton agreed gently, and I will inquire. But you need rest, and I have taken up enough of your time for one day. He tipped his hat to her and headed for the door, but her voice stopped him before he could leave. Quinton, he turned back. She was standing by the window, silhouetted against the fading light, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. Thank you for everything. For seeing me when I felt invisible, for caring when you had no reason to. I will not forget it. You are welcome, Savannah, he said softly. Sleep well. He did rent a room from Mrs. Chen, 2 doors down from Savannah's, and lay awake that night thinking about sage-colored eyes and the quiet strength it took to trade your last possession for food. He had met many people in his 27 years, but few had affected him the way Savannah Blake had. There was something about her, a core of resilience wrapped in vulnerability, that called to something deep in his soul. The next morning, he woke to the sound of activity downstairs and the smell of coffee and bacon. When he made his way to the dining room, he found Savannah already at work, moving between the kitchen and the table with plates of food for the handful of miners who boarded with Mrs. Chen. She had washed and braided her hair, and though her dress was still the same faded calico, she carried herself with a new energy. She caught his eye and smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. Quinton felt that tightening in his chest again, and realized with a start that he was in danger of losing his heart to this woman he had known for less than a day. Over breakfast, Mrs. Chen informed him that she had sent word to the school board about Savannah, and they would be meeting with her that afternoon. Quinton volunteered to accompany her, and though Savannah initially protested, Mrs. Chen overruled her objections. You need someone to speak for you, the older woman said firmly. Mr. Olsen has lived here for many years, has good reputation. The school board, they will listen to him. The meeting took place in the back room of the general store, where 3 members of the school board had gathered. There was Henderson, the store owner, along with Reverend Matthews from the church, and Mrs. Sarah Donnelly, whose husband owned the largest mine in the area. They listened as Savannah explained her background, her education, and her willingness to teach. The problem, Miss Blake, is that we know nothing about you, Mrs. Donnelly said, not unkindly. We have children in this town whose education is important to us. We need assurance that you are qualified and trustworthy. I understand your concerns, Savannah said calmly. I wish I could provide you with written references, but my circumstances have not allowed for that. What I can offer you is a trial period. Let me teach for 1 month without pay. If at the end of that time you feel I am not suitable, I will step aside with no ill will. The board members exchanged glances. That is a generous offer, Reverend Matthews said, but it does not seem fair to ask you to work without compensation. I have a proposal, Quinton interjected. "I will personally guarantee Miss Blake's salary for the first month. If the board decides she is not suitable, the loss is mine. If they decide to keep her on, they can repay me from the school fund and continue her employment from there." "That is quite a risk you are taking, Mr. Olsen," Henderson observed. "You have that much faith in someone you just met." "I do," Quinton said firmly. "Miss Blake has integrity and intelligence. I would stake my reputation on it." There was a long moment of silence, then Mrs. Donnelly nodded. "Very well. Miss Blake, you may begin teaching next Monday. The schoolhouse needs some cleaning and organizing, as it has been closed all summer. We expect you to prepare lessons for students ranging from ages 6 to 14. Can you manage that?" "I can," Savannah said, her voice steady despite the emotion Quinton could see in her eyes. "Thank you for this opportunity. I will not disappoint you." When they left the store, Savannah walked in silence for several minutes before finally speaking. "You did not have to do that. You have already done so much." "I know I did not have to," Quinton said. "I wanted to. Besides, it is a good investment. The children of independence deserve a quality teacher, and I believe you will be exactly that." "I will pay you back," Savannah said. "Every penny of that month's salary in addition to what I owe you for the boots and supplies." "I know you will," Quinton said. "But there is no rush. Right now, you need to focus on preparing for your students and settling into your new life here." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the schoolhouse, a one-room building on the edge of town with windows on 3 sides and a small stove in the corner. It was dusty and somewhat disheveled, but the bones were good. Quinton helped Savannah move furniture, sweep floors, and inventory the supplies left behind by the previous teacher. As they worked, they talked. Quinton found himself telling her about his ranch, about the satisfaction of watching his herd grow, about the simple pleasure of riding across his own land as the sun rose. Savannah told him about Missouri, about growing up in a small house with more books than furniture, about her father who had been a teacher himself before illness had stolen his position and left them destitute. "He was a good man," Savannah said, wiping dust from a stack of slate boards. "But he was also a dreamer. When those letters came talking about gold and opportunity in California, he was convinced it was the answer to all our problems. I think he wanted to believe it so badly that he could not see the deception." "We all have blind spots when it comes to hope," Quinton said gently. "It does not make him foolish, just human." "I miss him," Savannah admitted. "Even with all the trouble his dreams caused, I miss him every day." "That is how you know he was worth loving," Quinton said. "The ones we miss are the ones who mattered." She looked at him with those sage-colored eyes, and he saw understanding there, a shared recognition of loss and survival. In that moment, standing in the dusty schoolhouse with sunlight streaming through the windows, something shifted between them. It was not attraction, exactly, though Quinton felt that too. It was deeper, a sense of kinship, of two people who had weathered their own storms and recognized the same strength in each other. The week passed quickly. Quinton made excuses to stay in town, claiming he needed to check on business matters and visit with the blacksmith about new horseshoes. The truth was that he could not bring himself to leave, not while Savannah was settling in, not while he could still find reasons to see her. He helped her prepare the schoolhouse, brought her books from his own modest collection, and introduced her to the families whose children would be her students. In the evenings, they would sit on Mrs. Chen's front porch and talk until the stars came out, sharing stories and dreams and the comfortable silence that grows between people who are becoming friends. But it was more than friendship, at least for Quinton. With each passing day, he found himself more drawn to Savannah, more aware of the sound of her laugh, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the fierce intelligence that shone through when she talked about teaching. He was falling in love with her, slowly and surely, like a river carving its path through stone. On Sunday, they attended church together, sitting in the back pew while Reverend Matthews preached about mercy and second chances. After the service, several townspeople approached Savannah to introduce themselves and wish her well with the school. Quinton watched with pride as she charmed them all with her genuine warmth and thoughtful responses. "You have made quite an impression," he told her as they walked back to the boarding house. "The whole town is talking about the new school teacher. I hope they will be just as pleased after I have actually taught their children," Savannah said, but she was smiling. "I am nervous, Quinton. What if I am not good enough? What if the children do not respond to me?" "They will love you," Quinton said with certainty. "You have patience, knowledge, and most importantly, you genuinely care. That is what makes a good teacher." That afternoon, Quinton rode out to his ranch to check on things and give his hired hand, an older cowboy named Pete, a chance to go into town. The ranch looked good, the animals healthy and the fences secure. But standing in his small, tidy cabin that evening, Quinton felt a loneliness he had not experienced before. The space that had always seemed sufficient now felt empty, and he caught himself wondering what it would be like to have Savannah there, to share the life he had built. It was too soon for such thoughts, he told himself sternly. They had known each other barely more than a week, but the heart has its own timeline, and Quinton's had already decided. He rode back into Independence on Monday morning, arriving just as Savannah was unlocking the schoolhouse door. She looked beautiful in the early morning light, wearing a dress that Mrs. Chen had altered for her, her hair pinned up in a neat bun that emphasized her graceful neck. "I thought you would be back at your ranch," she said, clearly pleased to see him. "I wanted to be here for your first day," Quinton admitted. "For moral support, if nothing else." "I am glad you came," Savannah said softly. "Your presence makes me feel braver." The students began arriving shortly after, a mix of children from town and the surrounding ranches. They were shy at first, uncertain of the new teacher, but Savannah won them over within the first hour. Quinton watched from the back of the room as she patiently worked with the youngest students on their letters while giving the older ones more challenging arithmetic problems. She had a gift for making learning seem exciting, for drawing out the curiosity in each child. At lunchtime, the children scattered outside to eat the meals they had brought from home. Quinton and Savannah sat on the steps of the schoolhouse, sharing the sandwiches Mrs. Chen had packed for them. "You are a natural," Quinton said. "I knew you would be." "They are wonderful children," Savannah replied, her face glowing with happiness. "Even the ones who are struggling, I can see their potential. This is what I was meant to do, Quinton. I can feel it." "I am glad you found your way here," Quinton said, "even if the circumstances were difficult." "So am I," Savannah said, and when she looked at him, he saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. "More glad than I can express." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Quinton made the trip into town 3 or 4 times a week, always finding some reason to stop by the schoolhouse or the boarding house. He and Savannah spent hours together, their friendship deepening into something more profound with each conversation, each shared laugh, each moment of understanding. The town noticed, of course. Independence was too small for such things to go unremarked. But the gossip was generally kind, with most people agreeing that Quinton Olsen and Savannah Blake made a good match. Mrs. Chen was particularly vocal in her approval, frequently leaving them alone on the porch in the evenings with knowing looks and muttered comments in Cantonese. By the end of Savannah's first month of teaching, the school board had unanimously voted to keep her on permanently. Mrs. Donnelly herself came to the schoolhouse to deliver the news, praising Savannah's dedication and the progress the children had made under her instruction. "We are fortunate to have you, Miss Blake," Mrs. Donnelly said warmly. "I hope you will stay with us for many years to come." "I hope so too," Savannah said, and her eyes found Quinton's across the room. That evening, Quinton asked Savannah to go for a walk with him. They strolled through town and out along the road that led toward his ranch, the mountains rising purple and gold in the sunset. When they reached a small grove of cottonwood trees by a creek, Quinton stopped and turned to face her. "Savannah, I need to tell you something," he began, his heart pounding harder than it ever had during a cattle stampede or a river crossing. "These past weeks with you have been the best of my life. When I saw you that day in the alley, trading your shoes for food, something in me recognized something in you. Not just your struggle, but your strength. Your refusal to give up even when everything was stacked against you." "Quinton," Savannah whispered, her eyes bright. "Let me finish," he said gently. "I know we have not known each other long by traditional standards, but I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone before. You make me want to be better, to build something worth sharing. I am in love with you, Savannah Blake. I think I have been since the moment you looked up at me in that alley with pride and hunger and determination all mixed together in your eyes." "Oh, Quinton," Savannah said, and tears were streaming down her face now. "I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid that I was just grateful for your kindness and confusing that with deeper feelings. But it is not gratitude, it is love, real and true and terrifying in its intensity." He closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she breathed. "Please." Their first kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a soft press of lips that nonetheless sent electricity through Quinton's entire body. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Savannah's hands were gripping his shirt as though afraid he might disappear. "I want to court you properly," Quinton said. "I want to do this right. You deserve that." "I would like that very much," Savannah said, smiling through her tears, "though I think we have already been courting for weeks without putting a name to it." "Fair point," Quinton conceded with a laugh. "But now it is official, and eventually, when the time is right, I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife, to share my life and my home, but there is no rush. We have time." "We have all the time in the world," Savannah agreed, "and I want to do this right too. I want to be sure that what we feel is strong enough to weather the hard times that will inevitably come." "It will be," Quinton said with confidence. "What we have is not fragile. It was forged in hardship and honesty. That is the kind of love that lasts." They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans and talking about the future with the easy comfort of two people who had found their match. When they reached Mrs. Chen's boarding house, the older woman took one look at their joined hands and clasped faces and nodded in satisfaction. "About time," she said in her blunt way. "I have been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. Now maybe you can stop making moon eyes and actually eat your dinner." The courtship that followed was the talk of independence. Quinton was attentive and thoughtful, bringing Savannah small gifts and taking her on picnics in the foothills. Savannah introduced him to poetry and classical literature, reading to him in the evenings while he whittled small figures from scraps of wood. They attended church socials and barn dances, always the last to leave, reluctant to let the evening end. In October, Quinton took Savannah to his ranch for the first time. She had been curious about it for weeks, and he had been nervous about showing her, worried that she would find it too rustic or isolated. But Savannah loved it on sight, exclaiming over the view of the mountains, the neat corrals where his horses grazed, and the sturdy cabin he had built with his own hands. "It is beautiful, Quinton," she said, standing on the porch and looking out over the valley. "I can see why you work so hard to keep it." "I built it with the idea that someday I would share it with someone," Quinton admitted. "I just did not know who that someone would be until I met you." She turned to him with shining eyes. "Show me everything. I want to see all of it." He gave her the grand tour, showing her the barn where he kept his tack and tools, the chicken coop that provided eggs, the root cellar stocked with preserves and vegetables for the winter. Inside the cabin, she examined everything with interest, running her hands over the furniture he had made, the books on his shelf, the photographs of his parents that sat on the mantel. "You have made a real home here," she said. "It has your character stamped on every corner." "Do you think you could be happy here?" Quinton asked, his heart in his throat. "Eventually, I mean, when we are married." "I could be happy anywhere with you," Savannah replied. "But yes, I could be very happy here. I can imagine teaching during the week in town and coming here on the weekends. I can imagine us sitting on that porch watching the sunset. I can imagine children playing in the yard, helping you with the animals." "Children," Quinton repeated, warmth spreading through his chest at the image. "You want children?" "I do," Savannah said. "Someday, when we are ready. I want to build a family with you, Quinton. I want all of it." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and hope and dreams into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both were flushed and breathless. "I was going to wait until Christmas," Quinton said roughly, "but I cannot wait any longer. Savannah Blake, will you marry me?" "Yes," Savannah said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He pulled a small box from his pocket, one he had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, the same color as the California sky in summer. It had belonged to his mother, the only piece of her jewelry his father had managed to keep. "It was my mother's," Quinton said as he slipped it onto her finger. "She would have loved you. She would have seen in you the same strength and kindness that drew me to you." "I will treasure it always," Savannah promised, holding her hand up to watch the stone catch the light. "And I will do my best to live up to her memory." They decided to marry in December, giving them time to make arrangements and for Savannah to finish out the fall term of school. The town rallied around them with enthusiasm, with Mrs. Chen insisting on hosting the reception at the boarding house, and Mrs. Donnelly offering to make the wedding cake. Even Henderson got into the spirit, giving them a generous discount on household goods they would need for the ranch. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Savannah moved between excitement and nervousness, sometimes overwhelmed by how quickly her life had changed. Just 4 months earlier, she had been destitute and desperate, trading her last possession for food. Now she was about to marry a man she loved deeply and start a new life full of promise. "You ever wonder if this is all a dream?" she asked Quinton one evening as they sat on Mrs. Chen's porch. "If we will wake up and it will all disappear." "Every day," Quinton admitted. "But then I look at you, and I know it is real. We are real. Everything we have built together is real." "I am so grateful," Savannah said softly, "not just for you, but for everything that had to happen to bring me to that moment when you saw me. If my father had not died, if the claim had been real, if I had not been desperate enough to trade my shoes, we never would have met." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Quinton said. "Some connections are meant to be, and I believe ours is one of them." The wedding took place on a clear, cold December morning in the little church where they had attended services together all fall. Savannah wore a dress that Mrs. Chen and the other women of the town had helped her make, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Quinton wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his boots polished until they shone. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment, about two people becoming one while remaining individuals, about the sacred trust of marriage. When Quinton said his vows, his voice steady and sure, Savannah felt tears slip down her cheeks. When it was her turn, she spoke from her heart about love and partnership, about choosing each other every day, about building a life together on a foundation of respect and affection. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said with a beaming smile. "Mr. Olsen, you may kiss your bride." And Quinton did, tenderly and thoroughly, while the congregation applauded and cheered, when they walked back down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Olsen. Savannah felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The reception at Mrs. Chen's was a joyous affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. The townspeople who had welcomed Savannah so warmly celebrated with genuine affection, toasting the couple's happiness and offering advice both sage and ridiculous. When the party finally wound down, Quinton and Savannah rode out to the ranch under a sky full of stars. It was officially winter now, and their breath made clouds in the cold air, but Savannah felt warm wrapped in Quinton's spare coat and secure in his arms. The cabin was cozy, with a fire already laid in the hearth thanks to Pete, who had made himself scarce for the occasion. Quinton carried Savannah over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, and set her down gently in the center of what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Olsen," he said, his voice full of emotion. "Home," Savannah repeated, looking around at the space that would hold their life together. "I like the sound of that." That night, they began their marriage in earnest, learning each other with tenderness and passion, creating new memories to layer over the old sorrows. In the morning, they woke tangled together in Quinton's big bed, the winter sun streaming through the windows and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "Good morning, husband," Savannah said, stretching luxuriously. "Good morning, wife," Quinton replied, pulling her close for a kiss. "How does it feel to be married?" "Perfect," Savannah said simply. "Everything feels perfect." They spent the winter establishing their routines, learning to live and work together. Savannah continued teaching during the week, boarding with Mrs. Chen for convenience, while Quinton managed the ranch. But Friday evenings through Sunday mornings, they were together at the ranch, and those days became the bright spots they both looked forward to all week. In the spring, Quinton expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom and a proper study where Savannah could prepare her lessons and pursue her love of reading. They planted a garden together, Savannah showing surprising skill with vegetables while Quinton focused on the practical aspects of ranch management. By summer, Savannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and trepidation, aware of the risks but hopeful for the future. She continued teaching through the fall, finally stepping down in January when her pregnancy became too advanced for the physical demands of managing a classroom. Their son was born in March of 1884, a healthy, squalling baby with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. They named him James Matthew Olsen after both their fathers and marveled at the tiny miracle they had created together. "He is perfect," Savannah whispered, cradling the baby while Quinton looked on with wonder. "Absolutely perfect. Like his mother," Quinton said, kissing her forehead gently. "You did amazingly well." "We did it together," Savannah corrected. "Everything we do together." Savannah took a year off from teaching to care for James, and during that time, she and Quinton fell even more deeply in love, bound together now not just by attraction and affection, but by the shared responsibility of raising their child. Quinton proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful, carrying James around the ranch and narrating everything they saw as though the baby could understand. When Savannah returned to teaching part-time the following year, Mrs. Chen happily looked after James, doting on him as though he were her own grandchild. The baby became the unofficial mascot of the boarding house, passed around from boarder to boarder in the evenings, soaking up attention and affection. Life settled into a happy rhythm. The ranch prospered, Quinton's careful management and hard work paying off in a steadily growing herd and a reputation for quality horses. Savannah's school flourished, and she became one of the most respected members of the Independence community. They added to their cabin again, building a proper dining room and a larger kitchen, always with an eye toward the future. Their daughter was born in 1886, a tiny girl with golden hair and an imperious disposition. They named her Alina Grace, and she proved to be as different from her brother as two children could be. Where James was placid and easygoing, Alina was fierce and demanding, but both parents adored her completely. "We have a wild one here," Quinton observed one evening, watching 18-month-old Alina toddle determinedly after the barn cat. "She is going to keep us on our toes." "She gets that from you," Savannah said with a laugh. "That stubborn determination to get what she wants." "I think you might be confusing me with yourself," Quinton countered, but he was grinning. "Either way, she is going to be a force of nature when she grows up." In 1888, they were blessed with another son, whom they named Peter Charles after Quinton's hired hand and Savannah's father. The cabin was now full of life and noise, and Quinton built yet another addition, creating proper bedrooms for each child and expanding the living spaces to accommodate their growing family. Savannah eventually stepped back from full-time teaching to focus on raising their children and managing the household, though she continued to tutor students privately and never lost her love of learning. She created a rich educational environment at home, filling the house with books and encouraging curiosity in all three children. The years passed quickly, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children's growth. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father and the animals. Alina became a spirited, intelligent girl who could ride as well as any boy and had opinions on everything. Peter was the family peacemaker, gentle and artistic, with a talent for drawing that delighted Savannah. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinton and Savannah stood on the porch of their much-expanded cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside with Mrs. Chen, who had come out for the occasion, and for a rare moment, the couple had quiet time alone. "You ever think about that day in the alley?" Quinton asked, his arm around Savannah's waist. "When you traded your shoes?" "All the time," Savannah admitted. "It was the lowest point of my life, but also the beginning of everything good. If I had not been that desperate, if you had not been exactly where you were at exactly that moment, none of this would exist." "I like to think fate had a hand in it," Quinton said. "That you were meant to be there, and I was meant to see you, and everything that followed was inevitable." "Maybe," Savannah agreed. "Or maybe we just got extraordinarily lucky. Either way, I am grateful every single day. For you, for our children, for this life we have built together." "I still have your old shoes," Quinton confessed. "The ones I bought back from Henderson that day, I kept them all these years." "You did?" Savannah turned to look at him in surprise. "Why?" "As a reminder," Quinton said simply, "of where we started, of how far we have come. Of the fact that sometimes the things we lose come back to us in unexpected ways. You lost your shoes but gained a life. I gained everything I ever wanted." Savannah leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "You are a sentimental man, Quinton Olsen." "Only when it comes to you," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Only ever when it comes to you." The years continued to unfold in their quiet corner of California. The children grew, the ranch expanded, and Quinton and Savannah's love deepened with each passing season. They faced hardships, as all families do, including a particularly harsh winter that nearly devastated the herd, and an illness that struck all three children one terrifying summer. But they weathered every storm together, their partnership stronger for each challenge overcome. James eventually took over much of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and skill his father had demonstrated. Eleanor, true to her independent nature, became a teacher like her mother, though her methods were decidedly more progressive. Peter pursued art, moving to San Francisco for a time before returning to Independence with a wife, and establishing himself as a respected painter of Western landscapes. By the time Quinton and Savannah celebrated their 25th anniversary, they were grandparents 3 times over, and their home had become the gathering place for an extended family that included not just blood relatives, but the many people they had helped and befriended over the years. "We have built something remarkable," Savannah said on that anniversary evening, sitting in the same spot on the porch where they had spent so many quiet moments together. "Not just a family, but a legacy of kindness and community." "We built it together," Quinton reminded her. "Every bit of it. From that first day when I gave you my boots to right now, it has always been us together." "I would not have wanted it any other way," Savannah said. "You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me hope when I had none. You loved me when I felt unlovable. Everything I am, everything we have become, started with that single act of compassion." "And I would do it again in a heartbeat," Quinton said. 1,000 times over I would make the same choice, because choosing to help you that day was the best decision I ever made." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, their hands clasped, and their hearts full. The girl who had traded her shoes for food had become a woman of substance and grace. The cowboy who had seen her desperation and responded with kindness had become a man of wisdom and generosity. Together, they had created a life neither could have imagined in that dusty alley so many years ago. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren laughed and talked, the sounds of family floating out through the open windows. The ranch that Quinton had nearly lost and then rebuilt spread out around them, fertile and thriving. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, silent witnesses to all the ways love can transform lives. "Thank you," Savannah whispered into the gathering darkness, "for everything. For seeing me, for saving me, for loving me." "Thank you," Quinton replied, pulling her closer. "For letting me. For choosing me. For building this extraordinary life with me." And there, under the vast California sky, with the life they had created together surrounding them, Quinton and Savannah Olsen sat peacefully, their love as enduring as the mountains and as boundless as the stars above them, a testament to the power of one moment of compassion to change 2 lives forever.